I am Ibrahim Traoré, and today I'm pulling off your masks. Yes, you heard correctly.
That's the chilling warning Captain Ibrahim Traoré delivered to the people of Burkina Faso. He wasn't speaking hypothetically. He was speaking from first-hand knowledge. According to Traoré, foreign powers had begun targeting one member of the Alliance of Sahel states, pressuring them to break ranks. Their goal? To dismantle the unity between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And on April 16, 2025, their plot nearly succeeded. A coup attempt came within inches of toppling the Burkinabe government. 6 men, some in uniform, others in hiding, devised a plan to storm the presidency, dismantle the state, and surrender the country to foreign influence. But who were these men? How did they gain such deep access? And why were they willing to betray a revolution rooted in freedom? Let's unpack the details. This wasn't a dramatic ambush or televised rebellion. There were no burning buildings or military chants. They operated in silence. They infiltrated with precision. They disguised themselves with uniforms, badges, and polite smiles during briefings. These weren't rebels from the bush. These were insiders. Trusted, respected, even celebrated. And that's what made the betrayal so terrifying. It wasn't a direct attack. It was surgical, calculated, silent, like a dagger slipped quietly between the ribs of the nation. When Traoré stepped forward and named them, it wasn't just a press conference, it was a national alert. The danger isn't always outside your borders. Sometimes, it's sitting across the room. Each of the 6 had a unique background, different roles, different ranks, but they all shared one thing, an unshakable desire to seize power, even if it meant burning down the very house they once protected. Their credentials were strong. Their access was unrestricted. But behind the medals and missions was a festering rejection of Traoré's vision. They didn't want to challenge it through politics or reason. They wanted to crush it through force. What made the situation even more disturbing was how wide and deep their network ran. This wasn't a rogue battalion or a splinter group. This was a well-coordinated network spanning across commands, cities, and ideologies. One was still working inside a national intelligence hub. Another had vanished while on foreign assignment, only to resurface suspiciously in another country. Some had retired from active duty but were quietly feeding information from the shadows. They were architects of deception, strategists of sabotage. And some, as intelligence would later reveal, were connected to players far outside Burkina Faso. So what drove them to such extremes? Many believe Traoré disrupted their old ways. Gone were the cozy deals with outside powers. Gone was the era of dependency disguised as diplomacy. In its place came a new doctrine, one rooted in sovereignty and strength. Traoré spoke of building, of independence, of shaking off the West's grip. To the average citizen, that message was powerful. To the elite, it was dangerous. He was closing the doors they once walked through with ease. And in doing so, he created enemies not just abroad, but within his own armed forces. Some of these traitors had once been praised, others forgotten. But they found common ground in their anger. And together, they began crafting something beneath the surface, something dangerous. They moved quietly, recruited smartly, and waited patiently. They understood that the closer you are to power, the easier it is to topple it. And that's what made them so lethal. This wasn't a spontaneous riot. This was a blueprint. A betrayal designed with military-grade precision. But how did they manage to pull this off without being detected? The answer lies in the systems they exploited, and the people they manipulated next. Because these 6 weren't just plotting. They were reaching into the soul of the nation. They didn't rely on bullets. They relied on belief. Let's go deeper. In Burkina Faso's rural regions, where modern governance hasn't fully replaced ancestral authority, the real power still lies with traditional leaders, village chiefs, imams, griots, healers, pastors. Their voices shape opinions. Their words can calm a community, or ignite it. The coup plotters knew this. That's why even before their military operation was finalized, messages were already being quietly delivered to spiritual leaders across the country. No threats. No orders. Just carefully crafted whispers. They weren't asking these elders to fight. They were asking them to question, to cast doubt, to speak of discontent during Friday prayers or fireside stories, to turn ancestral memory into a tool of rebellion. It was psychological warfare dressed in cultural language. Some leaders stood firm. Others listened quietly. And a few, according to intelligence, agreed to help bridge the gap between the plotters and the public. In areas already devastated by poverty or insecurity, these messages fell on fertile ground. Most people didn't want to betray the nation, but many believed the capital had betrayed them first. That was the genius and the danger of this part of the plan. The coup wouldn't look like a coup. It would look like a public revolt, backed not by generals, but by tradition itself. And that's what made it so hard to stop. The line between cultural revival and spiritual manipulation is razor-thin in modern Africa. And these conspirators walked it like masters. An imam's blessing can sway a vote. A chief's silence can greenlight rebellion. A griot song can make lies sound like history. That's how they masked their mobilization. Troop movements can be tracked. Guns intercepted. But a sermon? A prayer? A hushed conversation at a funeral? That's much harder to trace. It gave their rebellion a layer of cultural camouflage, and made the entire plot feel legitimate, holy, even. If this part of their scheme had succeeded, Traoré wouldn't have been overthrown by a military coup. He would have been buried under a spiritual judgment. And that's the real war Burkina Faso faces now. Not just bullets, but beliefs twisted into weapons. As the Sahel reclaims its ancestral pride, the risk grows. Will tradition uplift nations, or be turned into a tool of chaos? And then came the twist. Who else was helping them? Were their religious leaders actively collaborating? Were others unknowingly pulled in? Or were some deceived, thinking they were protecting the country when they were actually tearing it apart? Investigations are ongoing, but one truth is undeniable. The battlefield has expanded. It's no longer confined to military barracks or government halls. It's in the pulpits, in family traditions, in public memories. And just when you think this conspiracy couldn't get darker, it does. As Burkina Faso's intelligence officers dug deeper, they made a terrifying discovery. Some of these 6 men weren't acting alone. They were in direct communication with insurgent groups. Yes, military officers plotting with the very terrorists Traoré had vowed to eliminate. This changed everything. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a full-on alliance between rogue soldiers and violent extremists. It was a new kind of war. One where ambition met anarchy. This is what warfare in the Sahel has become. The lines are blurred. Institutions are vulnerable. And when power, money, and weapons are in play, even those in uniform can join hands with warlords. The evidence was clear. Intercepted messages. Suspicious banking activity. Movements that didn't match duty rosters. Some of these 6 were in direct or indirect contact with known insurgents operating in Burkina Faso's most volatile regions. The conversations weren't always specific, but the pattern was undeniable. Disgruntled officers and bloodthirsty insurgents circling each other, each hoping to use the other for their own gain. The plotters had inside knowledge. The insurgents had guns. Together, they had a shared target. Captain Ibrahim Traoré. To the defectors, he was the man who stripped them of their old privileges. To the militants, he was the leader who refused to bow, who tore up foreign counterterrorism deals, and dared to replace them with an indigenous security doctrine. And that brings us to the next, and possibly darkest chapter of this story. If this coup had succeeded, it wouldn't just be betrayal, it would have been an open invitation for chaos to take over Burkina Faso. That's the horrifying truth that few are brave enough to say out loud. The traitors didn't need an official alliance with insurgents. They didn't need signatures, uniforms, or flags. All it took was a silent agreement, one built on shared hate, ambition, and whispered strategy. A commander who looks the other way at a checkpoint. A lieutenant who conveniently delays patrols. A captain who accidentally sends a convoy down the wrong road. That's all it takes to collapse a nation from within. Not just bombs and bullets, but quiet betrayal wrapped in protocol. But here's what should terrify every citizen. What if they had won? Would these insurgents honor any deal with the coup leaders? Or would they simply march in and claim what was left? With the military fractured and national trust shattered, The outcome would have been catastrophic. Civil war, the disintegration of national borders, and insurgents marching straight into Ouagadougou. Because these groups don't want negotiations. They want control. They don't recognize laws. They don't respect boundaries. They don't co-rule, they conquer. Their mission is clear: wipe away existing governments and replace them with brutal regimes built on fear and fanaticism. For them, this coup wasn't a threat to power, it was a golden opportunity. That's why this plot goes far beyond internal betrayal. It was a deliberate act of sabotage designed to collapse Burkina Faso and ripple across the entire Sahel. Mali and Niger would have lost their strongest ally. The alliance of Sahel states would have cracked. And Burkina Faso's bold path to sovereignty and self-reliance would have been crushed before others could follow. And while 5 of the conspirators are now exposed, caught, or publicly named, their networks, their connections, and their influence haven't disappeared. Some are still hiding. Others are in plain sight. So the bigger question now is, where did this treason begin? And more dangerously, who gave it shelter? Investigators say the trail leads beyond Burkina Faso's borders, into a nearby country now under silent suspicion. Because 2 of the plotters weren't hiding in caves. They were strategizing in a foreign capital. And that opens a brand new storm. Every failed coup has a launch pad, a hidden nest. But in this case, it wasn't in the forest. It wasn't in a bunker. It was in the middle of a modern metropolis, Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. As intelligence teams pieced together the conspiracy, a disturbing detail surfaced. 2 key suspects, Lieutenant Abdrahmani Berry and Officer Kaber Constantine, were coordinating the operation while based in Abidjan. Not exiles. Not prisoners. Military professionals. Active. Operating. And that revelation is sending shockwaves across West Africa. This isn't just a case of fugitives plotting in exile. It's about trained officers working to destabilize a sovereign government from within the borders of a neighboring state. And it raises brutal questions. Did they have support? Were Ivorian authorities aware? Were officials complicit, or just looking the other way? So far, Côte d'Ivoire has said nothing. No public statements. No joint actions. No sign of extradition. That silence speaks volumes. Inside Burkina Faso's leadership circles, quiet frustration is now boiling over into distrust. Officials are asking, how could 2 men plot treason from a country that calls itself our ally? Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire share strong diplomatic and economic ties. They face similar security threats. But now, those bonds are under pressure. Because this isn't just about harboring criminals. It's about allowing your territory to be used as a staging ground for a full-blown counter-revolution, which opens even darker possibilities. Were these men acting alone in Abidjan? Or were there political insiders, military actors, or business elites who helped? Was Abidjan simply the meeting place, or was it the control center? And if these 2 plotters could work undetected in Côte d'Ivoire, who else might be? Burkina Faso's intelligence is now following a tangled web of communication lines, leading across West African capitals like Dakar, Lomé, Accra. Some of these networks are ideological. Others are commercial. All are threatened by one thing: the rise of Traoré's Pan-African revolution. And that's why the Ivorian connection is so dangerous. If it's proven that foreign soil was used knowingly to launch this coup, it won't just spark outrage. It could reconfigure alliances, shift military cooperation, and redraw lines between friend and foe. Because this isn't happening in isolation. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have already rejected France, removed Western troops, and begun building a new security order that has made them enemies in certain places. Targets for pressure, sanctions, maybe even sabotage. So when plotters are found strategizing from Abidjan, it's not just an intel report. It's a ticking bomb. Traoré has been measured in his response. But behind the scenes, sources say Burkina Faso is quietly pushing for answers, and possibly extraditions. Côte d'Ivoire now faces a choice: prove they are not complicit in destabilization, or risk losing a fragile trust that's already wearing thin. Because even if they didn't sponsor the plot, the fact that their land hosted it is a problem that can't be ignored. And in a region this volatile, broken trust can escalate into real confrontation. So this is no longer about 6 men. It's now about diplomacy, sovereignty, and the future of West African alliances. Meanwhile, one man still hasn't been caught, Captain Wedrod René David. He remains at large, moving somewhere in the shadows. While leaders talk and governments negotiate, he's still free. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré isn't celebrating. He knows the fight isn't over. Instead of claiming victory, he's using this moment to trigger a national awakening. Most leaders would respond to a failed coup with mass purges and televised crackdowns. But Traoré is different. He's not reacting with panic, he's striking with purpose. Because he understands, this coup wasn't just a plot. It was a symptom of a deeper illness. An old disease that still infects the veins of Burkina Faso. To cure it, he's not just removing traitors. He's transforming the very system that allowed them to thrive. First, he began restructuring the military from within. Top units, especially intelligence and internal defense, are now under review. But instead of shuffling generals like past regimes, Traoré is going deeper. He's looking at loyalty, ideology, regional ties, everything. Because he doesn't just want obedience. He wants conviction. At the same time, he's rethinking how the state engages with religious leaders and traditional authorities. He knows now how easily faith can be hijacked. So rather than pushing them away, he's pulling them in. Not as puppets, but as trusted voices in the nation's future. He's building spiritual unity to defend against spiritual manipulation. But this transformation isn't just happening in boardrooms. It's happening on the ground. Traoré has visited remote bases, poor villages, and frontline zones, without cameras or speeches. Just a soldier walking among his people. Because he knows that real change doesn't begin with orders. It begins with presence. And in places where the government has long been absent, he's showing up. With roads. With training centers. With results. Because Traoré understands what many of his enemies don't. You don't destroy a revolution with bullets. And you don't protect one with fear. You protect it by proving it matters. And perhaps the most powerful response to the failed coup isn't even inside Burkina Faso. It's in the bond he's building with Mali and Niger. What started as a military pact is now growing into something more. Shared roads. Shared trade. Shared defense. Even talk of a new currency. Traoré's message is simple. You tried to break us. We'll respond by becoming unbreakable. The masks are off. The battle lines are drawn. And now, he's not just defending Burkina Faso. He's rebuilding it into a country where traitors can't hide, and betrayal dies before it's born. The final phase is near. Soon, every last conspirator will be exposed, and every plot dismantled. But the bigger question remains. Did this attack make Burkina Faso weaker, or did it make them unstoppable? Let us know what you think in the comments. Can Traoré truly finish what he started? Subscribe now, because we're not just telling stories. We're reclaiming them. Thanks for watching.